All right. Your name is?
I'm Franklin Noel. I'm a magistrate judge in the District of Minnesota.
Do you wish to share with us your age and your background?
Sure. I'm 66 years old. I've been on the bench for over 28 years. I'm an Episcopalian. They seem to want to know what my religion is.
Before you became a magistrate judge, where did you practice, and what was the area of your legal involvement, your career?
So I was primarily a criminal prosecutor. Actually, when I finished law school, I went to a large, multifaceted DC law firm and did that for about 2 years and quickly discovered that wasn't what I wanted to be when I grew up. So then I left the law firm and went to work at the district attorney's office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ed Rendell, who ultimately became the governor of Pennsylvania, was the district attorney at the time, and I worked for him for a number of years. Then I had an opportunity when my wife got a job in Minneapolis. She got a job at the Pillsbury Company, which no longer exists, but the Doughboy still does. I got a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, and so I became an assistant U.S. attorney, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of those experiences.
What was there about being a prosecutor that you think enhanced your abilities as a judge?
Good question. So as a prosecutor, especially a federal prosecutor, you have this power to not prosecute. So you can decline prosecution, which is a luxury you don't have in state court. And ascertaining and looking at a case and deciding which ones should be brought and which should not is an exercise that enhanced my capacity for judicial decision making, because you're making judgments about which cases should be brought, why they should be brought, which should not, and why they shouldn't.
Tell us a little bit about your pre-law academic background.
So I graduated from the State University of New York in Binghamton in 1974. Then I went straight to law school. I went to the Georgetown University Law Center. And then after that, I went to the law firm that I mentioned.
Right.
In college, I was a history major because I knew I was going to go to law school, so I didn't have to worry about majoring in something that would enable me to get a job. So I chose history because it was fun.
Right. What year did you become a magistrate judge?
I was appointed in November of 1989, and I thought when I became a magistrate judge that I would stay for a few years, get some more experience, get more, sort of broaden my legal horizon, get the civil experience that I had only tasted a little bit of at the law firm, and then move on to something else. But the job proved to be too much fun, and I just couldn't leave it.
Well, had you had an opportunity to apply to become an Article III judge, whether a district judge or a Court of Appeals judge, did you take an opportunity like that, or would you have?
I certainly would have had it come my way. The politics of the era and the situation never fell in my direction, so it never really materialized. But I would have certainly enjoyed becoming a district judge, or as our colleague Bobby Shepard did, to go straight from being a magistrate judge to a Court of Appeals judge would have been really sweet, but that didn't happen. And now I've been here 28 and a half years, and I'm due to retire at the end of next month.
What about your personal background, your heritage, your ethnicity, that gave you support in your judicial work?
Primarily it was two things. What I learned from being a prosecutor, having tried cases, gave me a lot of insight into the judicial function, especially the the things we do as magistrate judges, the criminal duties, the search warrants, the first appearances, the detention hearings, all of those things, my experience as a prosecutor helped me get there. The other influence was in doing settlement conferences in civil cases, which is a major part of our responsibilities as magistrate judges in Minnesota. A lot of what I was able to learn about human nature and how to mediate disputes, I learned from being a parent. Oftentimes dealing with lawyers and litigants in a settlement conference is not unlike dealing with your kids.
What was your reaction when you were told that you were selected to be the district court's magistrate judge? And tell me a little bit about your training after this selection.
So my first selection was surprise. The year that I applied, the 5 finalists in my year that I was applying were one senior, actually the first assistant U.S. attorney in our office. I was an assistant U.S. attorney. There was a woman who was a litigator at a large Minneapolis law firm who was very similar in character to the woman that I was replacing. Jan Simchich was my predecessor in this office, and I thought maybe she had a leg up. And then there was Bernie Becker, who was a half-time magistrate already, and he was one of the 5 finalists. And so most of the lawyers in town, myself included, assumed that the job was going to go to him. So I was surprised when I was selected. As it turns out, what I didn't know was that the district court had already put in place with the administrative office and the judicial conference the process to upgrade Bernie's half-time position to a full-time position, and he would have become a full-time magistrate judge when that happened. As things turned out, he ended up dying shortly before the full-time position became a thing. But anyway, the answer to the question is I was surprised that I was the one selected.
What about your childhood friends and your family members' reaction to your appointment?
They were surprised for different reasons. So my childhood friends, people in high school that I went to school with, they never thought that I was all that smart and didn't think that I would be a lawyer, much less a judge. People in law school, less surprised. I did fairly well in law school, and I had friends that knew me well, and they were happy for me and proud. But
Tell us about your primary duties as a magistrate judge.
So the duties of the magistrate judge in Minnesota are pretty similar to other districts around the country. Unlike yours, however, we do not do a lot of consent trials, but we have the capacity to do that. I've tried a handful of cases during my 28 years, but primarily all of the other duties are fully vested. All the duties that the statute provides are fully vested in all of the Minnesota magistrate judges. That includes the criminal, what the AO calls the criminal duty, the issuing of search warrants and detention hearings, first appearances, and those things. We do all of the what we call non-dispositive motions, the discovery disputes, the civil issues that arise that need to be decided before a case can get resolved. We do some summary judgment and other dispositive motions, which do have the capacity to dispose of the case on reports and recommendation. And we do all of the suppression issues and criminal motions as well.
Do you have any thought about how the process, the criminal and civil justice system process could be handled better, either in your district or in the federal judiciary?
So, not really. I guess I think the system kind of works the way it's supposed to. We I kind of treat all of the cases that are assigned to me as my cases, and the goal, at least with regard to the civil cases, is to get them settled before they get to trial. And it's sort of a mindset of mine that if a case actually goes to trial, I count that as kind of a failure on my part. It got too far. And by and large, it works fairly well. We handle the case, we do all the pretrial case management, we do the settlement conference, and hopefully the case settles. So I think the system is pretty well running as it should.
Aside from taking your duties as they are presented to you for your best effort, is there a best or worst part about being a magistrate judge that sticks out in your mind?
I would say the best part of being a magistrate judge is your staff. You have law clerks, you have a judicial assistant / courtroom deputy, and so they keep me grounded and running on the rails. And that enables me to spend my time pretty much doing the fun stuff, which is thinking great thoughts about interesting issues and making decisions. The other best part is the settlement conference work is, I find, extremely satisfying because you get to work both with the lawyers and the litigants and find creative ways to resolve disputes that getting it to go to trial and litigating it to the end would never even enable them to do. There's all sorts of resolutions that you can negotiate that isn't something that you would ever be able to get even if you win the case at trial.
Let me ask you about your reaction to the publication of the judicial profile of the Honorable Franklin L. Noel in the June-July 2018 issue of the Federal Lawyer. I understand that the writer of the article is a former law clerk of yours. It must feel satisfying to see that tangible evidence of the fact that you did participate and contributed well to the judicial system. Do you have any comments to make about that article?
It's all lies. She made it all up. No, that's a joke, in case anybody wasn't following. Tiffany Blofield is the author. She's a former law clerk. She's a great lawyer. She's a partner at a Minneapolis law firm. Actually, it used to be a St. Paul law firm. They've abandoned their St. Paul office. They're now a Minneapolis law firm, Winthrop and Weinstein. And she's a great lawyer. It is gratifying to see sort of this mini biography of what I've done as a magistrate judge, and it makes me proud.
That's terrific. Is there any decision or order that you issued about which you're most proud?
Yeah, there are a couple. I guess the one that comes to mind, I'd forgotten about it initially, and I was reminded of it embarrassingly at a wedding I was attending, and I'm seated at a table at this wedding, and I'm introducing myself to my table mates, and this one guy says, "Oh, we've met before, I know you." "Oh, really?" And it turns out he was a DEA agent or a local police officer who had testified in a suppression hearing I had in a case called United States versus Atlas, and I had recommended that evidence be suppressed, in part based on what this officer had done. And I said, "Oh, I remember that case." And, one of the other reasons I remembered it was that I had recommended that evidence be suppressed, and the chief judge at the time, Jim Rosenbaum, was assigned to the case, and he he didn't adopt my report and recommendation that the evidence be suppressed, and he allowed the evidence in. And then when the case went up to the Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, he was affirmed, but the gratifying piece was that Judge Richard Arnold, who is legendary and a judge for whom I have great respect, wrote a dissent saying that he, like the magistrate judge, and for the same reasons as the magistrate judge, would have suppressed the evidence. So that's a case that I remember well.
Well, now let me ask sort of the other side of that coin. Was there a humbling, embarrassing experience that perhaps you might not want to remember, but that maybe helped you as a magistrate?
The same case. So when I met the guy at the wedding, I had to spend the entire rest of the evening with him at this table after having discussed the case where I had found that he essentially had violated the Fourth Amendment in his duty as a police officer.
I see. Any memorable hearing that that you felt very much invested in?
Yeah, so there came a time, actually it was when Tiffany, who wrote the article in the Federal Lawyer, was my law clerk. We had a case called the United States versus Quabilla Shabazz. Quabilla Shabazz was the daughter of Malcolm X, and she was charged with conspiring to assassinate Louis Farrakhan, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam at the time, because historically there was a lot of speculation that Louis Farrakhan had ordered the assassination of her father, Malcolm X, back in 1965. She was represented at the suppression hearing by William Kunstler, who was renowned criminal defense lawyer who, through the 60s, had a number of notable clients. And so that whole experience was fascinating and interesting. We had international news media from all over the world coming into our courtroom to cover this suppression hearing, and there were some fascinating issues in the case, and I really enjoyed that.
What about the funniest experience as a magistrate judge?
So shortly after I became a magistrate judge, I was in court one morning doing routine civil discovery disputes. And I don't remember what the issue was, but I was getting, I ask, generally I'm fairly inquisitive at oral arguments and hearings, and I was asking this lawyer some tough questions. And his answers were sort of evasive and not really answering my question, so it became kind of a heated exchange. And at one point, he says, "Honey, look." And everybody in the courtroom sort of drops silent. And then the argument went on, and we're done, and we're leaving the courtroom, and my law clerk says, "Did he just call you honey?" And I said, "I'm pretty sure he had an argument with his wife this morning, and the exchange back and forth with these questions was a flashback." And he just substituted her for me while having this argument, and that has been a thing that has come up from time to time when asked about funny experiences as a magistrate judge.
Do you have any comments, thoughts about your law clerks, people who have worked at your elbow, as they say, in helping you do your work?
Yes, so the law clerks are, as I mentioned earlier, one of the best parts of the job. I have had a practice ever since I've started of hiring one law clerk every year for a 2-year stint. And we in Minnesota have always had 2 law clerks because we've always, even before they changed the process at the AO, we would have our courtroom deputy position filled by a lawyer. So we would have 2 law clerks, and then we had a judicial assistant who acted as our courtroom deputy. That whole process has since been formalized through the changes at the judicial conference and the administrative office. But I've always hired one law clerk every year for 2 years. And I have avoided and not gone to the rush that a lot of people have to hire a permanent law clerk. Because I think the law clerk experience should be a short-time thing. It's a training ground. It's something to sort of learn a bit about judicial decision-making from behind the bench, and that will enhance the law clerk's capacity to be a better lawyer when they get out in real practice. And I've had a number of lawyers that are law clerks that have gone on to do amazing things. Some continue to practice law. Tiffany Blowfield's a partner at Winthrop and Weinstein. I have another law clerk who's at another 2 law clerks that are going to the same law firm In fact, it's a firm called Green Espel, and the senior partner, Cliff Green, is really pissed that I'm retiring because he's sort of developed this pipeline of law clerks to come to be associates at his firm. One of my early law clerks is a guy named James Burrows, who is currently Governor Dayton's Chief Inclusion Officer, promoting diversity within the state, the executive branch of the state of Minnesota. I have another law clerk also from my early days who married a fellow from Sweden who she met in law school, and went on to Sweden with him, didn't speak any Swedish, since learned Swedish, had to sort of start law school over again in Sweden, and now she's a law professor at a Swedish law school, and has written a number of books for European lawyers about American law. So yeah, my law clerks are all amazing folks, and they're all really smart. All of them are much smarter than I am, and they made me look good for the last 28 years.
Tell us about your plans upon your retirement.
So I retire at the end of August. It's a very personal and individual decision, as Justice Kennedy has just shown us. I am against any mandatory retirement age for judges. In Minnesota, our state courts have a mandatory retirement at 70, and much to the loss of Minnesota, we lost Ellen Page, who was a Supreme Court justice for many years, an amazing one at that. But he had to retire when he turned 70, and he was not at all ready to retire. He's a very young 70. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm only 66. I'm in good health, and I'm looking forward to doing other things. A lot of my colleagues have retired and kept working as mediators or on recall status, and that's not my plan. I have two seminars that I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School. I might keep doing those things, might be doing some writing. Definitely plan to do some more traveling.
How would you like to be remembered in retirement after you've left the court?
I guess just someone who had served his court, his community, and his family with somewhat distinction, and it's been a great run. I've enjoyed it, had a lot of wonderful experiences, and I'm looking forward to new adventures.
Do you have any comment to make, any sentiments to express about the support of the federal magistrate judge program nationally through either the government or through the FMJA that you'd like to express?
So the Federal Magistrate Judge Association is an amazing organization, and it has supported magistrate judges throughout my career. One of the very first things I remember the FMJA for is changing our title from magistrate to magistrate judge, which at the time I thought sounded awful redundant. On the other hand, I was aware of the controversy over what do you call them. You can't just call them judge because that's already a job that's described in Article 3 of the Constitution. So you got to come up with some name. But it was important because a lot of our colleagues around the country were not getting the kind of support that the position demanded. And by adding the title judge, as simple as that is, was a major step forward, and the FMJA is entirely responsible for that happening. The pay raise thing, for years, the AO kept promising that there would be a pay raise, and judicial salaries kept falling further and further behind. And finally, judges both at the district level and at magistrate and bankruptcy level filed a lawsuit. It wasn't the first, there was multiple lawsuits, but the first ones were unsuccessful, and ultimately the last success was well orchestrated and a great architecture for how to get the job done. And I credit the FMJA for that entirely.
Do you have any concluding remark that you'd like to express for the interview?
Just that it's been a great experience. I've had the judicial things that I've described. One of the other opportunities I had as a magistrate judge was to serve on the Judicial Conference Committee on Criminal Law, which was an amazing experience. I've also had the opportunity to teach some classes at the University of Minnesota Law School in both criminal procedure and federalism, and those are just, I've just had a really an amazing experience as a magistrate judge, and I've enjoyed it greatly.
Well, I think I don't go out on too great a limb to say this, but I want to thank you on behalf of all the other magistrate judges who preceded you and who will come after you. Thank you for your service because it has established so much of a solid groundwork for the work that the magistrate judges do currently, in the past, and hopefully to do in the future. So thank you very much for your service.
Thank you very much. Thank you for talking to me.
You're very welcome.